Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Authentic Info Podcast. I'm your host, Adma Sandile Chauke. President Zuma might be going back to Escourt prison to serve the remainder of his prison sentence. Now, you will remember that former President Zuma had defied the state capture inquiry and a court order. Now, the Constitutional Court had found him guilty of contempt of court. And Zuma then took a decision to hand himself over. Remember, in 2021, in July, and he was taken to Escourt prison to serve a 15-month sentence. Now, Zuma's arrest has led to protests and looting in some parts of KwaZulu-Natal and some parts of Gauteng. You will remember that former President Zuma only served 2 months, and he was released on the first week of December in 2021 on grounds of medical parole, which was approved by the then Department of Correctional Services National Commissioner Arthur Fraser. Now, the Supreme Court of Appeal had declared Zuma's release on medical parole unlawful sometime in 2022. Now, recently, on the 13th of July 2023, we have seen the Constitutional Court dismiss a bid by the Department of Correctional Services to appeal an earlier ruling by the Supreme Court of Appeal. Now, the Appellate Division ordered former President Jacob Zuma to return to Escourt prison to serve the remainder of his sentence. Now, the Apex Court found that there was no reasonable prospect of success. Now, what does this mean? According to law, President Zuma or the Department of Correctional Services must make sure that President Zuma comes back to prison to serve the remainder of his sentence, which is 13 months. But now the news or information is that President Zuma is not around in South Africa. He's in Russia for medical reasons, and he cannot be extradited because he is there and he didn't know the outcome of that. There will be an outcome that says he must go back to prison. But it is the duty of the Department of Correctional Services to make sure that he comes back and serve the remainder of the sentence. Now, some analysts say that the sentence has already lapsed from outside because it has been 2 years and he was only sentenced for 1 year and 3 months. And others say that it is the duty of the Department of Correctional Services to make sure that Zuma is rearrested and he comes back to the Department of Correctional Services and Escourt prison to serve. And others say that there are other means to suspend the sentence, to serve from outside, and he can do some community service under monitoring. But other than that, you remember that the arrest of President Zuma has sparked protests, which led to businesses, malls being banned, people looting food and furniture, appliances, and all sorts of goods. Now, what does this decision mean to South Africa and the security of the state and even business? We've seen President Ramaphosa being questioned where he was supposed to go and address some meeting earlier on Friday, where he said that the state is ready, security is on standby, which means he welcomed the decision by the Constitutional Court to rearrest President Zuma to come back to, or to go back to Escourt prison to serve the remainder of his sentence. And we also have to check the the way this has affected business in both Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal. What does it mean? Because obvious business is now scared. Business people are scared. And what does it mean to employment? And what does it mean to those who are self-employed? Because we know that the July unrest has caused a lot of fatalities, number one, injuries, number two, job loss, loss of business, criminal records, people were arrested. Others others say that they didn't commit any crimes. Others, of course, were captured on camera. But we saw only one person being sentenced, although his sentence was suspended. They had to do some community service. But it has had negative effects on the economy, because you will remember that even the national roads were disturbed, which means the distribution of food to other provinces and medication was disturbed. So is the state ready to protect itself from another unrest? Because it seems as if our intelligence is not that intelligent, because they failed to detect that unrest in 2021 July. And coincidentally, this is another July 2 years later, where the president has to go through the same process. And the same process is believed to be the one that sparked the protest and looting. So is the state ready in terms of security? Are we having our intelligence on the ground operating, trying to prevent the loss of business and jobs and injuries and deaths to the citizens of South Africa? Now, it's quite questionable, because we know the state of police in South Africa is not that strong. I did not say it's weak. I'm saying that it's not that strong, and we know that they failed to handle the unrest which transpired in 2021. Are they ready? Do we have enough personnel in the SAPS to prevent such protests and looting? And is business ready to go through the very same process of losing their business, of losing their belongings, their goods, of losing their structures to fire? Because there were some buildings which were burnt, and some of the businesses did not come back, by the way. They did not come back. So isn't there another way to deal with this, or an intelligent way to prevent what transpired in 2021? Because we know that there are opportunistic criminals. We know that there are people who are ready, strategizing to make sure that they benefit more than they did in 2021 during the unrest where people were looting. We know that people might be organizing trucks already on standby. People might be organizing buggies already on standby. People might be organizing equipment to open even where there are chains, welded doors, and things like that. Because we have seen people looting things as big as sofas, couches, beds, bigger televisions, and things like that. What about jewelry stores which sells expensive, smaller things? Now you will never know. And we haven't seen the deployment of the army or SAPS already. Because I believe that if, in terms of security, we were ready to prevent another unrest, as the president said earlier, I think that already we should be having at least the police infiltrating these bigger cities, the metros. We should be having at least the soldiers on the streets trying to train the minds of opportunistic criminals not to try anything. Because we've seen a massacre in Phoenix and nothing has been done. So I don't think the state is ready. I think the president was not advised correctly. Because there's no police visibility. You go to a mall, the ruling came out on the 13th. You go to the mall on the 14th, there's nothing. I don't know over the weekend. And the people who were labeled as instigators of the unrest are still on the streets. No one has been found guilty, by the way. So what does this mean in terms of the security of the state? What does it mean to a person with a criminal mind? If there's no one on the instigators who has been arrested, because the people who are arrested are those who were captured with goods which they did not buy. And majority of them are released. Majority of them are outside. More than 90%, I'm sure, are outside. We've seen very few people who were sentenced for stealing or looting. Is the state ready in terms of security? I don't think so. Do we really have to send Zuma back to prison to serve the remainder of the sentence? I don't think so. Why? He did not decide himself to give himself medical parole. Even if he made an application, it was upon the state to decide whether he's medically unfit to serve a prison term. But it is the Department of Correctional Services to blame, and not the current National Commissioner. But another question is, do they have to bring back Arthur Fraser to answer for a department that is no longer serving? For a recommendation that he made back then, does he really have to come back and answer? Does the Zuma legal representation have to attack or deal with the Department of Correctional Services for their decision to release their client based on medical parole? Who is the person who certified that medically President Zuma is not fit to continue serving a sentence after 2 months? Now, these are the people who should be held liable, not Zuma, because he didn't send himself home. I'm sure one day he was called in the morning and then they break the news to him to say, hey, you have served enough and you are not fit to continue and serve the remainder of the sentence. Then you must go home. And we know that he was not going to serve 15 months. Maybe after 4 months, 5 months, they were going to recommend him for parole, not medical parole, a normal one. But he only served 2 months and was released. The Department of Correctional Services should be held liable for this. That is why they are the ones who made an appeal in the Constitutional Court to say the way they released Zuma and the recommendations that they made are correct in terms of the Correctional Services Act. So if they fail to interpret the Act or someone misled them and made the recommendation that the former President Zuma is medically unfit to serve the whole of his sentence, then those are some of the people who are supposed to blame. Because I believe that even the National Commissioner was informed. I mean, he's not a medical doctor. Arthur Fraser was not a medical doctor. He's a politician. He was informed. Recommendations were made to his office. All he had to do was to sign. But he represented the whole Department of Correctional Services. He represented it back then because it's no longer there. Now it's Tobachale. Now, do we have to see Tobachale's head going down for a decision that he did not make? So those are some of the questions that we have to raise that needs to be answered. Because if President Zuma goes back to serve the remainder of his sentence, but he has more than 15 months outside, which means he has finished serving a sentence. Because even if you get parole, let's say you're serving 15 months and then they give you parole on the fifth month, and then for the remaining 10 months, you are still serving a sentence, but from outside. And in this matter, President Zuma sentence is done. Whether there was a case or whatever, he was under correctional supervision. They were going to him to sign. They were going to him, obvious. He had to sign. Community corrections used to visit him. That is in terms of the Correctional Services Act. That after recommendation for parole, after someone has been released in terms of, based on parole or on parole, the person has to sign for the remainder of his sentence from outside, which means President Zuma has served his term, it's done. And if they want him to go back to prison, how are they going to erase the days that he was signing? And he has a case against the Department of Correctional Services. Because even if you make an application, it is the duty of the department to examine whether the person is not medically fit to continue serving a sentence under the conditions of prison. And this person must serve the remaining term outside prison. So I see a slight chance for Zuma going back to prison. To do what? Unless if the president and the leadership of South Africa doesn't love South Africa. Unless if they want to see another civil unrest, then that's something else. Because the way the Zulu people are organized is very scary. The guys are organized. They love each other. They protect each other. And Zuma is now at home and he is very attached to his people. They love him. They will do anything to protect him. Are we prepared for the worst? Are we ready to see the state and business and business going through difficult times again? Are we ready to see people being unemployed while the businesses are being revived, while structures are being rebuilt because they will be bent? Ladies and gentlemen, this is Authentic Info Podcast. These are just my views and my small analysis. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Thank you.